We speak. Our words, we listen.
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 Just enjoy yourself. We're all in our comfortable spaces here. I'm sitting on a Sunday afternoon in an armchair by a microphone. It should be easy. Yeah?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jules. I appreciate
Nobody's
that.
trying to trip you up. I'm going to turn off my camera now so I can just concentrate on my own words.
Okay. I might do the same, actually, because it's kind of distracting looking at myself, I find.
Thanks, guys.
I heard the other podcasts you'd done with Andrew and Jules, and, I suppose just to congratulate your group for opening up the conversation. The way you have approached it as well, you're providing a very kind of thoughtful, reflective space that's giving people the time to go over what are some quite complex ideas, giving a forum to develop the conversation. I'm personally kind of heavily invested in, be fair to say, behavior analysis, and I feel it's very important to have a conversation with the autistic community for a whole multitude of reasons that go beyond, that reach into the wider society as well.
Alan, that's lovely. Welcome to Spectrum Voices. Welcome to Autistic Radio. Welcome to the big behaviourist autism conversation. I've just been speaking with Alan Tennyson. He's possibly quite a big fish in behaviourism over in Ireland. He's got a title, and he's got an organisation, which he'll explain to us. But the important thing to me is that Alan said yes. Alan was willing to be one of those brave souls that comes and speaks to autistic people. So welcome, Alan. It's not every person in the field of behaviourism that's willing to come and speak to an autistic group. What made you decide to be one of those brave people, Alan?
It's clear to me that you're providing a reflective and thoughtful space where people can express, their views about why they continue to practice behavior analysis, why they believe it's the right approach for some people, and what it can offer as a scientific discipline.
So essentially you're saying you're not going to get your head bitten up.
Yeah, exactly. That, this type of conversation, it is difficult. It's challenging, and you can't conduct this via sound bites. It requires a thoughtful space where we can reason with each other and provide explanations as to, why and how and what we hope for the future as well.
You have a position in the behaviourist community in Ireland. Let me know about that.
I'm the chair of the Irish Society of Behaviour Analysis. We were set up a few years ago. Essentially, the main purpose of our organisation is to ensure that people who are receiving behavioural analytic support know that they're getting it from qualified people. So it's about public protection, really, when it boils down to it. And I believe that should be the function of any professional organisation. It should be less about the profession and more about redress should things go wrong in the practice of that profession.
I get the impression it's quite early days.
Yeah, it is. It's a new organisation.
Where's it going to go? What's going to be the end point of this?
For ourselves as an organisation, basically, we want to see regulated practice. we want minimum training standards, we want minimum standards for supervision, and we want minimum standards for ongoing professional development. So that when you have someone like me who's qualified, that they need to maintain a standard of practice and demonstrate that standard through their continuing professional development and through the supervision of their peers, and that they be accountable to the people that they provide support to. Accountability really is at the core of things. I've listened to some of the other conversations. I found them very interesting. I remember you, Jules, you raised about not trusting organizations. And that really struck me. And that's something I would very much agree with. I would not necessarily expect anyone to trust an organization. I would want the people who are using that organization to have powers, to have rights. It's like, it can be summed up with rights, not charity. By having rights, you need to be able to exercise those rights so as you can take action when things go wrong. And that's really the kind of empowerment that we want to see the users of behavior analysis have into the future.
I think you can probably predict my next question then. If it's about the users of the service having influence, that sounds like autistic chaps like me.
Yeah.
How's that going to come about?
Right. Okay. So I think that, for people like us now, like you and Harry and Morris, you have this platform, you're able to articulate. So you're able to, speak for and put forward your voice, your place at the table. You know what I mean? So in some ways, that's the easy question to answer, is that the seat at the table. But, not everyone can participate. Their views still need to be taken account of. That's the really difficult question, isn't it? Structures to involve people. We haven't set it up yet, but one of our goals in the coming years is to have an experts by experience panel to be given places on our admin committee for the running of the organization. And the behavior analysts that are on our admin committee, are autistic as well. So, so those kind of structures need to be part of an organization. But there's also, what I'm getting at is that there's also a more fundamental thing for the rights of people who are not fully engaged in processes, either by choice or because they don't have the skills to engage in those processes. Am I making sense there, Jules?
In my mind, I visualized that as a bit of a swerve you did there. It's almost as though you're saying, okay, Jules, well, people like yourself, Harry and Morris, you have a platform, but we want to go around you because you've already got a platform, and actually we want to reach the people who are not taking that platform themselves. So it feels to me as though we organize ourselves to say, hey, look, we want to be involved. And you're saying to me, no, we want to go around you because you're all okay. We want to speak to the people who aren't getting involved. They're more easy for us to deal with. We're more in control of that situation.
Okay, right. So sorry I came across like that. What I intended to say was that, yes, you and the people who have a platform, and also the people without a platform. So both. I would not think we need to exclude one in favor of the other. I would include both there in that.
Seats at tables involvement and sort of governance level only ever gets a sort of sample number of people in, but the ability for everyone with an experience they need to raise to get into the process, an opening for them needs to be designed in. Where do they make sure they can get heard? and indeed answered.
Exactly, Maurice. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting. We've been thinking about this for a while now, and like I find these type of conversations help me develop my thinking on this. So, like this is about progress for us as a community as well. I don't think we've reached a final destination on how this is done by any means. Where my thinking is at now with it is that I tend to put a lot of weight in the structures around human rights. I suppose what has informed my thinking around that has been people like Professor Gerard Quinn, who was the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of people with disabilities. Fundamentally, it boils down to rights, not charity. It means that a person has access to justice, has recourse when things go wrong. These kind of imbalances of power between providers of services and people in receipt of services comes to the root of a lot of the difficulties. It can happen in very, very subtle ways. Whose values count when goals are set for change? So it's like I am not the one choosing the goals for myself, but someone else is choosing them for me, the institution who is responsible for my care. And then those asymmetries of power mean that I'm on the receiving end, or the people being supported are on the receiving end of those decisions.
The phrase you said there, asymmetry of power, the imbalance of power.
Yeah.
That's important to us. But you're framing it when things have gone wrong. And my concern is that all the way through the process of being supported by an outside agency, a family might experience a feeling of the imbalance of power right at the beginning. How do we address that?
Yeah. When you say family, you put me in where I start to think about my own practice, because I would work with children and families a lot. So that's where I go to there. Some of those asymmetries of power are very difficult to unpick. So when I go and see my GP, there is a power imbalance there between me and my GP. I perceive them as knowing more about something and telling me what's happening. So there's that kind of dynamic that can happen there. I suppose for us, we're trying to say, let's put our head together. You're the expert on your own life. And based on what you're telling me, what you want to achieve, I can start thinking about how we might go about achieving that. Where things are going well, we can begin to approach goals that someone might have that a family has for their child. But even at that, I mean, goals that a family might have for their child are necessarily driven by the values in a community. That's where behavior analysis has got itself into trouble in the past, because it hasn't focused enough on those values. It has tried to present itself as a valueless technology, as a science, without fully acknowledging what should have been obvious, is that who chooses those goals, why they're chosen, reflects broader issues in society about how disability and mental health is viewed, how education is viewed, and what should be amenable to change.
Wow.
Well, whoever chooses as and initiates or suggests goals are kind of a key to start with in preventing conflicts and objections, is to be clear that the patients, including a child, is never forced to comply with them. There's elements of that, of a choice on the receiving side too. I actually hope it won't just be a receiving side, but let's look at when it is.
I think Morris has the crux of it there, because it's right at the beginning, the setting of goals, who sets the goals, where the loss of rights, loss of vision of a human being as somebody with their own unique standard, their own unique way of dealing with the world, that's where it gets lost. And to avoid the end goal, which you first spoke about, the making sure that there's recompense or some kind of recourse through an organisation afterwards, that's right at the end of these things. And to avoid those, we need to be dealing with the first steps right at the beginning, don't we?
Yeah, I would agree absolutely with that. That the selection of those goals, who decides what matters, who decides what's important, they're absolutely key. Where behaviour analysis has got itself into trouble is that people have come to behavioral science with a query: can you do this? And without, to paraphrase Jurassic Park, without stopping to think, should we do that? They've just gone ahead with how would we go about doing that. That needs balancing and redressing. It's an issue across mental health and disability, this kind of obliteration of the person to conform. It's very, very obvious in a very institutionalized environment. And I've been in those kind of environments. I've worked in those kind of environments when I was younger, both in nursing homes and services for people with disabilities, where there is the structure of the organization, how getting up in the morning is organized, how going to the toilet is organized. All of those things leave no space for personal autonomy. It's entirely removed in those medicalized settings. It's easy to identify in those extreme examples. Where it's less easy to identify then is where the values of a community are imposed on a child with a disability, say, that you should sit still, be quiet, be docile.
I think I said wow earlier. I think it's because I'm hearing neurodiversity terms. It sounds as though you're taking on board some of the concepts that advocates have been putting forward over the last few decades. But people will think that it's a sugar coating to a reality of something that's unchanged. How do we address that?
I think that's the real issue there as well. So I suppose what I'm very much interested in and focused on is when people need support. We're all going to need support at some point in our lives. As we get older, when someone else needs to care for us, or when our community needs to care for us, needs to support us, that support, what does that look like? And traditionally, we have resorted to institutionalized environments when that type of support has been needed. Ireland has this terrifying history with institutionalization. Professor Brendan Kelly wrote a book a few years ago called Hearing Voices, A History of Psychiatry in Ireland. Essentially a history of the institutions that incarcerated people under pretext of mental health. But, they became vehicles for social control as well. That was just mental health. We also had mother and baby homes, industrial schools, a whole system of incarceration, to the point that in the 1950s, Ireland was incarcerating more people than the Soviet Union at the same time. It constantly shocks me, but I've recently fact-checked it again, and it seems to hold up. It might actually have been Brendan Kelly in Hearing Voices that came from this tradition of institutionalization. And Ireland's not alone in that. That's, the UK had different structures, but similar outcomes. And now we really have to give serious thought to how that support in the community happens, and in genuinely individualized support. We have a long way to go yet on that journey. I still don't think we are anywhere near where we need to be in terms of facilitating people's autonomy within their community. There's been all kinds of barriers to that, particularly around how we atomize and individualize people without seeing them in their full context. They're removed from their place into another place that will provide this kind of specialist support.
The Irish context is interesting, and it's interesting that you use that recent history to inform you, because I think access to that is helping you to see things possibly from a patient's eye view. I don't think necessarily we have the same closeness to those scandals here in the UK that enable us to see the point you're making. It's interesting that you use those examples from your history.
Yeah, I guess it's impossible not to be informed by that kind of institutional legacy that we have in Ireland. And personally as well, when my uncle was 19, he was, incarcerated in a mental hospital, and he never returned home. He spent the remainder of his life in care in various other kind of community homes and stuff, and the outcome for him was very, very poor. And I suppose my own father would have like what would probably be described as severe and enduring mental health concerns, and I've always been kind of almost terrified of that institutionalization. And on a personal level, then that has given me a lot of time to reflect and read around this history of institutionalization. So it's both a cultural place that we're in, and it's very personal for me as well. I see that reflected anywhere where another person needs to rely on the support of their community, of the support of others, that these problems can arise, these issues of institutionalization. So, that's what has informed my thinking on this, I suppose.
People listening, particularly the people who are part of the autistic community, look on behaviorism as the institutionalized enforcement of social standards put in a program to train children. That's what they perceive it as. And I'm not sure I've changed my opinion on it yet. Am I being entirely unfair?
Well, with my history and what has brought me to behavior analysis is the science itself and an interest in the science and the application of the science. So I believe that when someone is offered support, that support should have a reasonable chance of working and should have demonstrable effectiveness. It should be demonstrated to be effective in whatever terms. Now, the terms of effectiveness, as we know of, we've spoken about values and the choosing of goals. That's a thorny issue, but it should have social validity and for the person themselves. So that is what has brought me to behavior analysis, behavioral science. I was, very fortunate to study with Peter McGill, and he's a prominent behavior analyst and professor at the Tizard Centre. And, he has advocated all his life for effective supports for people experiencing challenging behavior, and that those supports be delivered in their own communities and that they not be institutionalized in what are effectively out of area, expensive and dangerous placements. And, the recent history of that in scandals like Winterbourne View and Ars Attracta has been our own equivalent of Winterbourne View, has demonstrated that, we haven't achieved that yet by any stretch of the imagination. Our communities continue to lock people up effectively in assessment and treatment units. And so, my view of behavioral science is that it depends on who and why it's being applied and in whose values it's serving. And certainly it's not a neutral science. It can do harm. And we should be aware of that. And I think the potential for it to do harm is going to increase into the future if we're not careful.
All about, I think, is there's something need to be applied to help someone recover, or is there something wrong with someone in the first place? The concern about many autistic people is that as children, even as adults, they feel like their own identity is trying to be changed or eradicated because it's looked upon as an illness rather than being an identity itself. Yeah, because a lot of people feel that autism is just different. It's not something wrong. If there's challenges, there is behavioural sort of things you can do. I did cognitive behavioural therapy, and that was to help me deal with not overthinking and not over planning and not worrying too much about things that may or may not happen. So there's a lot of good things out there that can help people, but some people feel like autism itself, autism being the way the brain is, people are trying to slap that out of people to make them perceive this as so-called normal. And everybody knows that there's no such thing as normal, so it seems so self-defeating and very damaging to not just the people you're doing it to, but even the people that are actually doing it.
Yeah, absolutely, Harry. It's not logically consistent. It doesn't make any sense to do that because there's no such thing as normal. It's entirely obvious that is completely inappropriate, to me at least. I don't know how, the only way I can fathom those things coming about is that where a society values conformity to such an extent that it's willing to apply techniques in order to achieve conformity. That speaks to the values of a society. And it's those values that need to be addressed. If you follow me, or if I'm making sense on that.
You are making sense on that. However, an awful lot of people listening are going to say that what you're saying is exactly the opposite of what they see being demonstrated in the literature surrounding behaviorism. They talk about normalizing behaviors. They talk about altering patterns. They talk about enforcing training regimes. The two things don't compute for me. They look in as though they're in opposition somehow.
Yeah, I like how I would listen. This is my take on it, right? How I would construct that, how I would approach that would be, so like the early days of behavior analysis, there was these in like incredible papers published. I'm thinking Gold Diamond in particular, the constructional view, and Skinner as well in Beyond Freedom and Dignity, where they looked at coercion and control in society and they said, like, this is a problem. Coercion and control in society there's too much of it and it's bad. I'm not being nearly as eloquent as they are, obviously, but that sums it up. And, but we continue to have a lot of coercion and control in society. It's all around us. Now, I think what happened to the discipline of behavior analysis is that it became too tightly bound up with the providers of institutional support, and it started to come to reflect their agenda and their values, as in the providers of disability services, or the providers of autism services, and it started to answer questions that were important to them. And when you start to answer questions that are important to disability providers without answering the questions that are important to the people with disabilities or the people that they serve, then you wind up in a place where they're looking for answers to how do you get people to be still, be quiet, be docile. And it's the same thing within education.
They also can have in common that some parents are either ambitious or embarrassed and become considered as acting contrary to the humanity of the child.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to take up Morris's lead on a different occasion there. It's a big subject, moving from the behaviour analyst themselves to the parents of the child is a rather big jump.
Yeah, but here they just have in common as being two parties. No, the way you tick their boxes, you go down the path that's just been described, Alan just described.
I think Morris makes a really interesting point for us to return to. It's a big subject he's got there. Today, with Alan, I feel we've scratched the surface with you. I feel as though we've picked a few little directions for our conversation to go in for the future. We've made a start with you.
Thank you.
Are you willing to come back to us, expand on a few things, take up Morris's point in the future?
Yeah, I would be very, very happy to. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to you. And I would view it as an opportunity to progress some of my own thinking.
Lovely. Well, that's what we've been hearing from the behaviourist community. They've been coming here. They've been exposed to a few thoughts from us. They have a conversation with us, and then they say they're willing to come back and progress their thinking. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks a million, guys. You're very welcome. Thanks for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Spectrum Voices Conversations is an Autistic Association production for autisticradio.com. The big autism conversation, behaviour analysis, will be continuing. If you are one of those people who has a voice that wishes to put some words to this conversation, feel free to contact us and join us. news@autisticradio.com. Thank you, everyone, today.
Autistic Radio is personal and it's informal. which means that those taking part speak only for themselves. If they mention an organisation that they work for or they're a member of, they're not speaking on behalf of that organisation. We shouldn't take any implication from that. It's also the case that people's opinions change over time. So while this recording is there forever, people change.